I finally binge-watched all of Dexter a few months ago, and after 2 somewhat lackluster finales, I was extremely skeptical of the prequel Original Sin. However, the feedback that I've heard about the show has been overwhelmingly positive from people commenting on the channel, so I decided to give it a shot. And after finishing Season 1 of Original Sin, I certainly have some thoughts on it all. I'm gonna start off with how I felt about all the casting choices, because these are some of the most iconic characters in all of television. So stepping into these shoes must have been a daunting task for these new actors. And I'm glad that I can say I really liked what Patrick Gibson did with the character of Dexter. Having Michael C. Hall as his inner voice still gave great continuity and really helped ease me into the idea of a new actor playing Dexter. And this sort of immersed me into the fact that this was indeed a younger iteration of the classic lovable serial killer that we've gotten to know over the years. You could really tell that Patrick spent a lot of time trying to nail all the small mannerisms of Dexter. All in all, I was blown away by how well Patrick stepped into this character. And I similarly felt that Molly Brown was great as Deb. In general, Deb is a very foul-mouthed, emotionally volatile character, and I thought Molly brought that energy. The whole rich drug dealer love interest was a bit underwhelming, and I kind of wish she had a more interesting subplot. It was pretty obvious that was gonna end poorly, and I could have done without the whole going out on a yacht and getting stranded on an island thing. As for the rest of the Miami Metro team, Masuka was fine. The actor nailed the laugh, which is really all you can ask for, I suppose. But I will say that he became a little grating as the season went on. I feel like Batista was alright as well. He didn't really stand out to me as bad or good, but it is funny that he's worn essentially the same outfit for 20 plus years. LaGuerta was a little weird because she's actually a good detective in this season, so that felt a bit odd. Maybe she'll take a shot to the head or something in Season 2 to explain the regression in her detective capabilities. And Harry is probably the portrayal I'm most conflicted on, because Christian Slater plays him wildly different to how James Remar did. But on one hand I like this because most of what we get from Harry is not actually Harry, and merely how Dexter chooses to remember him. So it does make sense that he'd be a bit different in the flesh, but at the same time I do miss that sort of fatherly kind presence he had in the OG show. I'm actually going to make an entire video where I deep dive my thoughts on Harry as a father, so I'll cut this off here for now, but this prequel series definitely solidified my feelings on just how bad of a father figure Harry was. Now I do have to ask, where was Captain Matthews? I feel like he definitely would be on the force at this point because he knew Dexter's father, so that was a bit of an odd omission. But speaking on omissions, I was very happy to not see any of Dr. Vogel. I hate her character, and I'm perfectly fine with writing her out of the plot completely. Getting into my thoughts on the story and plot lines of Season 1, this was definitely a jam-packed season with a lot going on. You had Dexter graduating and slowly acclimating to life as a member of the Miami Metro team, the main killer storyline with Patrick Dempsey's character, a side killer storyline that ended up being Brian Moser, the Harry and Laura Moser flashback sequences, some Deb high school and relationship drama sprinkled in throughout, as well as Dexter dating her best friend. This was a lot for 10 episodes, but I liked a good chunk of it. Captain Spencer as the main antagonist of the season was solid, probably a mid-tier villain amongst the pantheon of Dexter's serial killers, and the idea of Dexter having to combat someone who was also on the force was an interesting direction to go in. But the fact that Spencer was only doing all of this because he was mad at his ex-wife felt like a bit of a flimsy reason. I would have preferred if he had some sense of morality to him and felt like he had to work outside the law to dole out proper justice. That would have forced Dexter to combat someone similar to himself, which could have been far more interesting. The flashbacks with Harry and Dexter's mom is something that I'm very conflicted on. We've seen this stuff so much throughout the original series, and we all know how it ultimately ends, so there's not much to gain from all of this runtime devoted to it. And since the season was so jam-packed with plot, I think a lot of the time spent on this could have been allocated elsewhere and the show would have been better off for it. However, that visual of Brian in the corner of the shipping container with his mother's head lying next to him was straight chilling. And I do like that we got a few moments of Harry bonding with a young Dexter, and Laura was successfully fleshed out. Here she is a more developed and sympathetic character, so her fate is even more tragic when we do eventually get to that storage bin scene. Being back in Miami and having the Metro team dynamic was probably the biggest strength of this season. The series is simply at its best when we're in Miami and investigating crimes. And I really enjoyed returning to a similar vibe as the first few seasons. The finale here felt very safe, Dexter takes out the bad guy and everything resolved itself for the most part. But I kind of don't mind this because the last few Dexter finales have been so poorly received by fans. So this type of ending is very understandable. We went safe, wrapped up everything in case a season 2 didn't get greenlit, and as a fan, I was at peace with it. One thing I do want to also discuss is Brian Moser, because I think we got way too much of him. Me personally, I would have only included that one scene of him asking to sit with Dexter at the diner, and then let fans theorize if that was indeed Brian or not. And then I would have brought that side killer storyline into season 2, and had a nice reveal that it was actually Brian Moser towards the end of that season. In general, I feel like it's weird that Brian is so fixated on stalking Dexter already, because we're like 10 years away from season 1. So now it's like, why did Brian wait so long? Also, if you're gonna go this route with a lot of Brian, I feel like we should have seen Harry also bonding with Brian in the Laura flashbacks. Brian doesn't really interact with Harry much in these sequences, which is just a little weird to me. If we were gonna build up their relationship, that seems like an obvious way to do it. I will say that I did love the editing style of Original Sin though. I feel like the flair from the first few seasons was very much alive and present here. Some of the jump cuts in particularly were great. Like there's one really cool one that cuts from a splat of blood to a fingernail being painted red. In general, we're just seeing a lot more creativity behind the camera. Sometimes the cool style doesn't hit or looks a tad bit ridiculous, like when Brian morphed into a young Brian in his standoff with Harry. But I like that we're being creative and at least trying, because after the first few seasons, the show's style kind of became a bit tame and predictable. In terms of where I think things are heading in future seasons, given how much Brian is present thus far, I do think that we're going to retcon Harry's death or maybe just add a new layer to it. I believe that Brian will be directly or maybe indirectly responsible for killing Harry. It just feels like that's what we're building to with these two characters. And as for the scope of the series, I'd like 1, maybe 2 more seasons of this show. Anything beyond that might outstay its welcome in my eyes, because at a certain point you're just going to get too close to the events of the original series. All in all, I'm actually going to give Dexter Original Sin 2 different ratings. Purely judging it from a writing perspective, I think this prequel is about a 6 out of 10. There's simply too much story trying to be told here, and I do think there's a few missteps along the way. However, simply on an enjoyment level, I'd probably give this season a 7.5 out of 10. It was better than I expected a Dexter prequel to be, and I did find myself enjoying it far more than I thought I would. It's kind of nostalgia slop to some extent, but god damn it, I enjoyed this nostalgia slop. To me, this sits as a pretty middle tier season of Dexter. It's certainly not on par with seasons 1 through 4, but is probably right around season 5 level of quality, and certainly better than season 8 or New Blood. Well, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Dexter Original Sin. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And how many more seasons would you like to see of it? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe for more Screen Stories content. Until next time, peace.